How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Greetings and welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the United States. Delighted to have you with me. The second hour of the program. I hope you're ready for the weekend. I know I am. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. If you weren't here the first hour, Jacksonville, Florida. I'm in a hospital. Don't have a call screener today. Doing another cancer care-a-thon for childhood cancer. And I am, so I'm going to be here 6 hours, and then I'm going to take a flight home late. And anyway, I want to talk to you about this piece I stumbled upon, the headline, America's New Segregation. And I got to tell you, so I saw this headline in the New York Times, America's New Segregation. I was like, oh, good Lord, what are they going to complain about? And then I read it, and I was like, you know, this is actually a good piece from David Brooks. Let me just give you part of his introduction here. He actually does the America's democracy's under threat. President Trump smashes alliances, upends North Trump's constitution, blah, 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 blah. Then he talks about his failures running a business, blah, 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 blah. But now let me read you this, because he talks about traveling a lot. This experience has produced in me, this is David Brooks, one central conviction about what ails America: segregation. Not just racial segregation, which at least in schools is actually getting worse, but class segregation. I'm constantly traveling between places where college grads dominate and places where high school grads dominate. And it's a bit like traveling between different planets. Back in 2003, Theda Skopel of Harvard published a book called Diminished Democracy. One of her arguments was that more Americans used to join cross-class community organizations like the Rotary or the Elks Club, but gradually highly educated people left them for professional organizations filled with others more like themselves. Skopel wrote, once highly educated Americans would have been members and leaders of such cross-class voluntary federations. Now many barely know about them. That self-segregation was symptomatic. Many college-educated people were at the same time segregating themselves in neighborhoods where nearly everyone had college degrees, into professions where everybody did, into social circles in which you can go weeks without meeting somebody from the working class. Last year, a group of researchers published a study in the journal Nature in which they surveyed leaders in 30 fields, including law, media, politics, and so on. They found that not only had nearly all of society's power brokers gone to college, 54% of them went to the same 34 elite schools. That's segregation on steroids. Those of us in the college-educated class are good at segregating ourselves from others, but we're astonishingly good at segregating our kids, simply by equipping our kids to join our ranks. Before kindergarten, the children of the affluent are much more likely to be in preschool. By sixth grade, students in the richest school districts are 4 grade levels above children in the poorest school district. By high school, richer kids' average reading skills are 5 years ahead of poor kids. By college, according to a 2017 study, children from the richest 1% of earners were 77 times more likely to go to Ivy League schools than children from families making $30,000 a year or less. In his 2019 book, The Meritocracy Trap, Daniel Markovits writes that the academic gap between the affluent and less affluent is greater today than the achievement gap between white Americans and black Americans in the final days of Jim Crow. Now, I got to tell you, on the plane last night, I'm reading this like, wait. Did I just read that right? Let me read this again to you, because even David Brooks, like, you let this sink in. The academic gap between the affluent and less affluent is greater today than the achievement gap between white Americans and black Americans in the final days of Jim Crow. And then he writes this: nearly all of us were raised on the conviction that Jim Crow was rancid. We've effectively recreated it on class lines. So you may want to stand up and be part of the resistance to Trump, more power to you, but let's be clear that resistance is treating the symptom, not the ailment. The ailment is the tide of global populism that's been rising across the developed world for years, if not decades, and the cause is that our societies have segregated into caste systems in which almost all the opportunity, respect, and power is concentrated within the educated caste, and a large portion of the working class understandably wants to burn it all down. I'm somewhat worried about what Trump will do to America over the next 3 years, but I'm really worried about what will happen if global populism dominates the world for the next generation. What if the political climate lasts the rest of our lives? And then he notes that Democrats have given up on school reform that would be a great leveler. The Thomas Fordham Institute's research has demonstrated red states are now more active than blue states in education reform, and red states are leaping ahead. I've talked about this on the program, that there's a so-called Southern surge, the rise in test scores in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee. The literacy rates among black kids in the South is now better than in the North. In sector after sector, Democrats are in danger of becoming the party of the status quo. Now, let me just read you this, and I'll stop reading and just get into my analysis of this. When Trump goes after an institution like DEI, the federal bureaucracy, or universities, the resistance folks rise up to defend the institutions without acknowledging there's a kernel of truth behind Trump's critiques. They don't want to give him the win, so they end up defending the institutions up and down the line. Trump ends up looking like the change agent, and resistance looks like the defenders. In my view, those of us who oppose Trump have two jobs: to resist and to reform, and it will require policy reform. And most of it is social reform. Y'all, amen. Now, here's something that he doesn't say, and I'm going to say, and it's something that I think a lot of the elites in this country don't want to talk about, don't want to acknowledge. You know, the one institution in society that is the great leveler? The church. Now, I know if you're not you're a secular person, you don't care about that. But the church is the only organization on planet Earth where everyone who goes is equal. All sinners going to hell except for the love of God. The church, the synagogue, even the mosque, where everybody stands before God equally, entitled to his wrath. And over time, as people have started worshiping at other altars with idols, we now segregate ourselves based on our idol worship. Brooks can't write that, but it's what he's getting at. He doesn't acknowledge that, but it is what he's getting at. People worship their idols, and you go to a religious experience with the people who worship the same idols now. You go to your baseball game or your football game. You worship your team. He actually talks about the Mets. As is their wont, the Mets have been trampling all over my heart the past few months, but over that time in places around America, I've had scores of people from all walks of life come up to me to talk about the Mets, which leads to conversations about other things. Sports does. But also, I mean, you're there where you're there cheering on, but you go to your political rallies with like-minded people. And you know, the data still shows in this country that conservatives are more likely to know liberals than liberals are to know conservatives. Liberals are increasingly white and upper income, and they live together in neighborhoods, and you can know them demographically. And when you drive through those neighborhoods, you see what's going on. You see the signs in the yard. Now, there are certainly rich white Republican neighborhoods. The working class is actually far more diverse in their neighborhoods. My old neighborhood, so I back in 2011, moved into a nice neighborhood. It's a very multiracial, multi-ethnic neighborhood. In fact, it's the most multiracial, multi-ethnic neighborhood in Middle Georgia. And we live at the front of the neighborhood. The houses are bigger, the yards are bigger, but I mean, it's pretty diverse. I mean, I've got one of my neighbors right next door is black. Another on the other side is a college professor, white guy. Across the street, there's an engineer, 2 doctors, and then up the street there's an Indian family next to an Indian family, next to a white family, next to a black family, next to an Asian family. They're Chinese, next to a Korean family. It's pretty diverse, but it's not nearly as diverse as the old neighborhood we lived in, where there are a lot more working class people. And the working class people, there are Hispanics and blacks and whites and Koreans and Chinese, and it was super diverse. And by the way, people were neighborly. There were no sidewalks in the neighborhood, but people out walking on the street. Everybody knew each other. Everybody kind of looked after each other's homes way more. And then you get into the upper income white neighborhoods. You don't even have front porches anymore to hang out on. Brooks makes a pretty good point here that upper income people have segregated themselves from the rest of society. And the rest of society is rebelling against them. And it would behoove the wealthy progressive people to stop showing their disdain for those who disagree with them and actually get to know the people on the other side. You know, you got to walk a mile in another man's shoes. I think that's a Drew Holcomb. Boy, y'all, I said Drew Holcomb the other day, and it's Holcomb, but I said it the way I say it, and got an email from a Holcomb that you mispronounced his name. It's like, you just didn't understand me. But nonetheless, he has a song, Walk a Mile in Another Man's Shoes. And we probably should be doing that, particularly if you're a white upper-income progressive, but you don't want to, and that's the problem. Because you're starting to, because of the idols you worship, see other people as evil. Again, I want to go back to this key paragraph. It's one I think that you got to understand, and particularly if you're upper income, you need to listen to this. The academic gap between the affluent and less affluent is greater today than the achievement gap between white Americans and black Americans in the final days of Jim Crow. If you're an affluent American, it behooves you to support school choice and academic reform in the country. In southern states, it's happening. And a lot of progressives have a lot of dripping disdain for the South because it's more conservative, it's more religious. And the fact is, the southern states are beginning to excel at literacy. And literacy is the key to everything else. Kids who are better readers tend to do better in math. Even when they struggle in math, they outperform kids who don't read well. People who read well, and this is one of the problems, by the way, with ChatGPT and the like, is that it's kids are getting synopses as opposed to reading books. You need to make your kids read books. We make our kid read books. Thankfully, he is less begrudging as he's gotten older. He's discovered books he likes, but reading is the key to everything else. And the southern states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, they have been working real hard, and Alabama have been working real hard on literacy among poor black kids. And those poor black kids are now outperforming the poor black kids of the North and the West and of New England. And they're going to get better jobs, and they're going to do well in life. And the key has been to learn to read at an early age, and they're doing it. And white progressives are opposed to the programs that have been generating these successes, because a lot of it has to do with school reform and school choice that the teachers' unions oppose. And it is the upper-income white progressives who are rebuilding a serf class in this country. We are more segregated now, or our achievement gap between the upper incomes and the lower incomes is greater than the achievement gap between the white and the black people of Jim Crow. That's a warning sign for us, but it's a warning sign that comes from the failures of progressive policies, and the progressives can't acknowledge it. Well, I have the most bizarre story of the day for you guys. You may want to sit down for this one. Let me just read you the headline of the story. This is the most bizarre thing. And I got to credit notthebee.com for this. Rhode Island man found guilty of rape after faking death, fleeing country, giving interviews, claiming to be a disabled Irish orphan. Going to read that again to you. Going to read it again. Rhode Island man found guilty of rape after faking death, fleeing country, giving interviews claiming to be a disabled Irish orphan. Yes, Rhode Island man Nicholas Rossi, legal name Nicholas Alaverdian, was accused of sexually assaulting his fiancée in 2008 after an argument. The two lived in Utah. The woman, who had been living with her parents and recovering from a brain injury, responded to a Craigslist ad. Ding, 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 there's the problem. The two were engaged after 2 weeks of dating, after which he allegedly became violent and demanded money. She testified that he raped her in his apartment one night after she drove him home. A decade later, he was identified in a separate rape case. After the state cleared its backlog of DNA analysis, the fiancé decided to come forward. To evade arrest, Rossi fled back to Rhode Island, faked his own death of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, left the country for the United Kingdom, and pretended to be a disabled Irishman named Arthur Knight, from the Associated Press. Rossi was extradited to Utah in January 2024 after insisting he was an Irish orphan named Arthur Kent who had been framed. Investigators say they identified at least a dozen aliases he used over the years to evade capture. He appeared in court this week in a wheelchair, wearing a suit and tie, and using an oxygen tank. He was arrested after being hospitalized with COVID. Instead of admitting he isn't very good at identity fraud or acting, he doubled down and gave media interviews with his supposed wife to proclaim authorities had the wrong man. I'm not making this up. By the way, a jury found in Salt Lake City found Rossi guilty of a 2008 rape after a 3-day trial in which his accuser and parents took the stand. The verdict came after Rossi declined to testify. He will be sentenced on October 20th and is set to stand trial in September for another one. And looks like he's going to face up to 5 years to life in prison. Is that not the most bizarre thing you have heard? Yeah. I got nothing. I got nothing. So instead, let me tell you about my bank, Old Glory Bank. There's no way to transition here. oldglorybank.com/Eric. You can go there. You can get a checking account. You can get a savings account. And I've used the bank now for about 2 years. What I did is I went to oldglorybank.com. Now go to .com/Eric. Filled out the form online. It only took a few minutes to do. I got a debit card. I got a checking account. I got a savings account. They're no-fee checking account. The interest is good on the savings account. You can get more advanced accounts. They've got premium accounts, interest-bearing checking accounts. They've got business accounts. You can do loans. You can do CDs. They're a fully functioning, fully operational bank. Headquartered in Oklahoma. They're an online bank, and unlike the old online bank I had, which is one of the big reasons I switched, you can deposit cash at Old Glory Bank, and they're by conservatives for conservatives. oldglorybank.com/Eric. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply. Greetings. Welcome back. It's Eric Erickson here from Jacksonville, Florida. Don't forget, if you text Eric, ERICK, to 33777, you can get the live stream, the show notes, the podcast, and a whole lot more. I got to talk about Rivian for a moment. I know some people who have Rivians, and I talked about it yesterday. Probably a little more insulting than I really don't like the Cybertruck from Tesla. I think it's a hideous looking vehicle. I just don't understand how anyone can look at the vehicle and say, "Oh, I want that." Rivian makes vehicles that actually look like trucks and SUVs, and they're apparently as cool as the Tesla, but they got some problems. And the real problem here is this: electric truck maker Rivian says the rollback of fuel economy rules in the United States is holding up $100 million of revenue, a sign of how changes to automotive policy under the Trump administration are starting to hurt the electric vehicle industry. Rivian and its rivals have generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue selling credits tied to the nation's fuel economy rules. But after the Trump administration removed penalties for violating those standards, the nation's top automotive regulator stopped issuing paperwork necessary to finalize those credits, leaving EV makers in the lurch. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said the change was part of moves to overturn binary EV rules and address corporate average fuel economy standards known as CAFE. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is focused on fixing CAFE standards to make cars more affordable again. When the process is complete, we will return to issuing compliance letters to manufacturers. Last week, the Zero Emission Transportation Alliance, an EV trade group, filed a petition to the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., asking the court to intercede. The group wants to force NHTSA to resume issuing the so-called compliance letters, certifications that show how much each automaker complies with or violates the nation's fuel economy standards. Data declined to comment. The dispute highlights a lesser-known part of the U.S. auto industry, the buying and selling of so-called regulatory credits. Revenue from these credits has been a reliable stream for EV makers and a hefty expense for legacy car makers whose fleets contain gas-guzzling pickups and SUVs. You got that? So we have, actually, let me read this one more paragraph here. Credit trading is a common practice used by governments to let industries comply with environmental regulations. According to financial analysts and environmental organizations, car makers whose vehicles exceed gas mileage rules can generate credits and sell those to competitors who are in violation of the rules, helping offset any fine they may face. Y'all, the government of the United States created an artificial market for electric vehicles. There are people in the United States who have electric vehicles who love them. Many of my listeners among them. A lot of them have Teslas. I know some of them have Rivians. I've been impressed by the look of the Rivian. I know someone quite well who has a Rivian. I know someone who has an F-150 Lightning. In fact, he parks in the garage at my office. And you know what he can't do with the F-150 Lightning and he's frustrated about and is thinking of trading it in? He can't haul his boat far, particularly in colder weather. The battery runs down too fast. He was a little disappointed. He was bought in on the technology, bought on the environmental stewardship aspect of it, and it's not working for him. And he's really disappointed. In fact, Ford and GM are now scrambling to change their entire EV business model because the EV market isn't working anymore. With the government credits going away, the EV market is collapsing. And that's the problem here. The government created economic incentives for people to switch. By the way, more upper income people than lower income people. A lot of them made the switch. And they did it because of the tax credits. It was economically advantageous to them. And a lot of them would not have made the switch but for the economically advantageous programs. And states got in on the act as well due to federal laws and incentives. They set up, for example, HOV lanes where people can drive if they have a electric car. Even if there's one person in the car, they can drive, things like that. It was an artificial market created by the government. And governments change and policies change. And the Trump administration has become more hostile to the idea of EVs. And in the result of becoming more hostile to the EVs is they've gotten rid of a lot of the tax incentives. The tax bill that the Republicans passed did this. Not only that, they're lowering the CAFE standard again. Now, for those that you're familiar with the CAFE standard, that cars have to get certain miles per gallon unless they're designed in certain ways that allow them to get beyond that. And, you know, there was an interesting take in the Wall Street Journal the other day that the CAFE standard has forced a homogeneity among cars, that the originality of cars is going away because you have to do certain things to comply. Think of CAFE standards as the assault weapons ban for cars. Now, why that analogy? Many of you who are Second Amendment people, you understand this, that the assault weapons ban passed during the Clinton administration was designed so that certain guns, if they basically were spooky-looking guns. If they were black and they had certain attachments, they were banned as assault weapons. But if you changed it to pink, you added a Hello Kitty sticker, and you got rid of a sight, you could have the exact same gun. It was just missing a sight. It was pink and it had a Hello Kitty sticker, and it would have passed muster. The uniformity of the laws on the assault weapons ban forced some changes to the look of guns to be able to get around the ban in the same way that the uniformity in CAFE standards have forced a uniformity in cars. And one of the things that the new law has done, because they can't get rid of the CAFE standard, is they got rid of the fines that you have to pay if you violate the CAFE standard. If you're an automaker, you can now make a car that violates the CAFE standard, and you will not get fined by the federal government. It's been a way to erode it as the EPA itself walks back the CAFE standard. And because they're walking back the CAFE standard and they're getting rid of EV tax credits, the government has collapsed the market for EVs. And so for a company like, for example, Rivian, which is entirely premised on the EV tax credit, they're now having wild financial problems. Rivian intends to build a big plant in the state of Georgia. And I was actually, the other night, I was approached by a guy, and he asked me what I thought about it. And I said, I suspect it's going to be a car manufacturing facility for someone, but maybe not Rivian, given the tough economic situation. And it is a tough economic situation for Rivian, but it is now for Ford as well. Because Ford, in fact, Ford has purchased $4.3 billion of credits. General Motors has spent $3.5 billion to buy credits to keep in compliance with regulations around the world. So you've got this credit market. It's an ephemeral government-created market. By the way, the regulatory changes that the federal government's doing with CAFE standards could actually save GM and Ford money because they won't have to buy these credits. But as it helps them, it possibly hurts Biden. Now, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has been reconsidering the CAFE targets because the Biden administration wanted them to achieve a 50.4 miles a gallon average by 2031 and increase the fines, which would have virtually eliminated gas-powered vehicles. Now, all of this comes because of the EPA's carbon finding years ago that carbon was fueling a climate crisis. The EPA is going to begin repealing that rule. And once they repeal that rule, the legal justification for so much of what the Biden administration did is going to go away. The problem here is obvious. It's that it requires Congress to actually get involved, because this is going to swing back and forth between administrations. As Democrats get elected, Republicans get elected, it goes back and forth, and it leaves the situation in a lot of limbo, given that the executive branch changes and the opinions of the executive branch change. It's got to get Congress to act, and Congress can't act on this stuff because there aren't enough votes to act, and it comes through reconciliation. And because reconciliation is a majority vote in the Senate, that too, like the public policy, can swing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. There's just it's become an unstable market. But the bottom line is, based on the economic data today, most Americans would prefer, particularly among trucks, gas-powered trucks. Now, again, I understand in your situation, you may love your Rivian, you may love your Tesla, you may love your Leaf, and I know people who do. I've got a friend of mine who actually is on his third Leaf, and the battery runs out and he gets a new one. And that's part of the problem too, is, after up to 5 years or so, the batteries don't hold the charge as much, and it becomes more and more of a problem. But people tend to love them. They don't have to pay for oil changes. They don't have to pay for gas. And it saves people money to a degree to have an electric car if you could use it. And the irony is that the government, when Democrats are in charge, kind of want you to have an electric vehicle. All of my friends who have electric vehicles are like, well, it's a good fit for me. I commute back and forth to the city. But my buddies who have the electric trucks, particularly the one guy I know well, is like, I thought it would be a good fit. They sold it, and it doesn't have the mileage that they claimed it would have. Even Ford's CEO tried to drive, I think it was from San Francisco to Las Vegas. Ford's CEO tried to drive the F-150 Lightning, and he realized there were all sorts of problems in how long it took to charge, the lack of available charging stations, the charging stations that weren't powerful enough. And even Ford's CEO, he rethought it. Here's the problem. These companies aligned towards market forces that were created by the government. They did not align to their passengers and customers. I upgraded to a Yukon Denali. Went up with my buddy Jim Hardman in Gainesville, Georgia. Got a Denali from him. Good people up there. And I have had a problem with it's got a nice big screen in it. Every week, it seems like I got to reboot it. It crashes. It freezes. And it is a known problem in this model car. And there's a software update, I guess, that I learned yesterday. The reason I learned yesterday is I was on my way to Atlanta and I got a call from GM because I had filled out a new owner survey. And I said, I love my car except this one problem, and it happens constantly. And they called. It was good customer service. They actually read the survey and they called me about it. And the lady's like, yeah, this has been a problem for some people, not everybody. But there actually is a fix. Get it to the dealer and they'll be able to fix it. It's like, well, that's good to know. It's been the one thing one problem I had with the car. They listened to me. The problem is that Ford and GM weren't listening to their customers when they were developing their EV plans. They were incentivized not by customer demand. They were incentivized by government demand. And now that the government demands have changed, they're listening to their customers, and it turns out they invested a lot in these programs, and the customers themselves didn't actually want what they were offering. I could have told them that. And because the government changes here and there, they needed to. But what's notable is that how has it changed now? How has the government changed? The government under Trump has changed to allow the companies the flexibility to do what they wanted to do. So GM and Ford, they want electric vehicles of kind, just not what the government wanted them to have. The Biden administration was all stick. You're going to do this or we're going to fine you out of existence. And now that Trump has come along and said, you know what, there's a better way. Well, that better way is collapsing the EV market. And companies like Rivian are out lots of money, it looks like, because turns out without all the government subsidies, people would rather a gas car that takes them 5 minutes to fill up and they can keep going another 300-400 miles. Americans for Prosperity has actually been advocating these common sense solutions in government for some time, and they would love to have you engage with them around the country. Americans for Prosperity is pushing 250-step challenge for freedom. It's based on our 250th anniversary. They're calling for a bold new campaign called One Small Step. It kicks off with 250,000 Steps for Freedom Challenge. Every American can make a meaningful step towards a more perfect union, and you can engage with this challenge. It's not about politics. It's about principles. It's about freedom. It's about remembering who we are as a nation, what we stand for. Freedom, the freedom to choose your life, the freedom to set your policies in life, the freedom to not be burdened by government mandates, the freedom to live your life with the government just arranging the world in such a way that the government's not in control of your life. You are. You can find out more by going to afpvolunteer.com, and you can take the challenge too. You can find out about the challenge and you can take it. Go to afpvolunteer.com, afpvolunteer.com. I'm on the board of advisors of AFP, and we're going around the country and we're reminding people that freedom is precious and it can slip away within a generation if we're not actively committed to it. And on our 250th anniversary as a nation, we need to be committed to freedom. Learn more at afpvolunteer.com. Welcome back. It is Eric Erickson. Y'all, just a very brief AI segment here. This is wild. This is really, really wild. I've told you that I tried to use AI for my afternoon podcast, the 4 Things to Know in the Afternoon, and I would send it links and say, I want to do these 4. Here's my take on each one. I'd given it everything I'd ever written, so it knew my voice. It was like, write my script, and then it would send it, and I would edit it, and stuff started not making sense. Like there were stories, but they didn't add up. And the most famous one, and the moment I knew I couldn't do this, and I was going to have to go back to doing it all myself instead of trying to use AI to help, was there was a Pete Hegseth telling the Senate not telling the Senate he would honor court decisions, and AI wrote about it as Pete Hegseth celebrating a birthday for the Marines in Los Angeles. It was very bizarre. So another lawyer has cited a bunch of fake AI hallucinated cases. And this is the thing. The AI hallucinates. It makes stuff up. The lawyer says she didn't knowingly do it. Well, you can't cite a bunch of cases that are made up, and this lawyer did it. It was clearly AI that did it. Here's what the court has sanctioned her. The lawyer has to write a letter to the 3 judges to whom she attributed fake cases. She will be kicked off the case. Her brief will be thrown out. She must give her client a copy of the judge's order. She must send the order to every judge presiding over any other case she's involved in. And the court is going to send a copy of the order to all state bars where the lawyer is admitted. The lawyer is probably going to lose her license as a result. This is in the judge's order. Let me just read you this. Plaintiff Ms. Mavey, Argelina Esther Mavey, is advised to read this order and is particularly directed to its final 2 pages. That's right. The lawyer is advised to make the plaintiff read. Think about this. If you're a lawyer, the judge is saying and writes it in very clear English at the end that essentially your lawyer used an AI system to make up cases. And it's probably going to end the lawyer's career as a result. And there's a caution out there for all of you that AI is making stuff up. I keep having these conversations with my kids that AI is making stuff up now. And the more you use it, the more likely it is to make it up. And the reason is multifaceted, but at the end of the day, it's this. As you use AI more, it picks up on what it thinks you want, and it's programmed to give you what you want, not what you need. And that's the bottom line flaw in AI right now. Another lawyer probably wiping out her career by citing cases that were completely hallucinated by an AI. Be careful out there.